Good evening. Thank you for joining Acterra's Promise to Our Planet benefit, for sharing your time and contribution toward promoting sustainability within your communities. For 25 years, mine has been working to accelerate electric transportation. I joined the General Motors EV1 program back in the mid 1990s and discovered firsthand that I like torque and horsepower more than anyone rightfully should, but I also learned how many benefits there are to fueling transportation with cleaner, cheaper domestic electricity. It was a heady time, not unlike this one. California's zero emission vehicle program had just been created, and we were a bunch of enthusiastic kids excited to show the world just how cool EVs could be, sometimes in creative ways. Those who leased the cars loved them as much as we did, and we were sure we were off to the races. The auto industry was less excited, however, and our initial hopes were eventually, well, crushed. Come on, you had to know that pun was coming. We tried various things to bring attention to the story, including holding a funeral for the car, complete with a eulogy from some guy who went on to become mayor of Los Angeles. Eventually, rather than let the story go untold, we decided to tell it ourselves. Initially, we thought we'd burn copies for our parents and move on with our lives, but after being picked up by Sony Pictures, it ended up in theaters and on DVD around the world. Then and since, we've encouraged audiences to get involved in all manner of ways, including supporting organizations like this one. We also suggested you raise your own voices, let your favorite automakers know you want to see more plug-in cars made. Which is how, on the evening of the Chevrolet Volt debut early in 2007, GM's then Vice Chairman Bob Lutz stood in front of me and asked, "Okay, can you please get your people to stop emailing me now?" His daughter overheard, took me by the arm, marched me into a corner, and said, "Don't you dare. You have no idea how much those people changed my father's mind." Before that night, Bob Lutz had been known as sort of maximum horsepower Bob. Individual actions do matter. While we swore we'd never do another, that event also ended up being the first shoot for our second film. Very different from the first one, Revenge of the Electric Car shares the early efforts of Tesla, Nissan, and GM to bring electric cars back, along with the adventures of a DIY converter who wasn't willing to wait for any of them. Day to day, however, I work with stakeholders around the world: automakers, policymakers, utilities, nonprofits, and the user communities themselves to replace fossil fuels throughout transportation. The grout between the tiles, so to speak, which is a more fun job than you might suspect. And we even are making progress. Goods movement, in particular, is having a moment, so to speak, especially in these COVID times. Often disregarded over the years as not being very cool relative to Teslas, online shopping and global supply chains have increased the need to strip pollution from this sector, and lower cost of operation is generating more interest in doing so. More companies are realizing as brands that their customers want them to be more sustainable and more progressive. In fact, while DHL once had to resort to making its own electric delivery trucks because so few were available, their street scooter has now been spun off into a company on its own. In India, IKEA and Flipkart are delivering orders via electric rickshaw. And in New Zealand, postal carriers use similar vehicles for their versatility on footpaths and extra cargo capacity. Every time I go, I try to get them to let me test drive one. It hasn't happened yet, but it's a mission. Municipal vehicles are also going electric, including early deployment of electric garbage trucks and street sweepers. And in ports and airports, ground support equipment and forklifts have become popular segments to electrify. EVs are even making their way into agricultural uses, including this new electric autonomous tractor. But let's face it, we Americans are uniquely captivated by cars, not only as a means of transportation, but as an extension of our identities. And more electric cars and trucks, in more variety than we've ever seen, are coming in the next few years. But there are already dozens of models available, especially in California. As such, the US ranks in the top few regions for EV deployment, and California alone is significant in the total number of EVs sold. Yet we also have a long way to go. EVs account for about 10% of new car sales in California, but nationwide it's only about 2%, in large part because fewer models are available in most of the country. America remains firmly in early adopter territory. In Norway, by contrast, over 70% of new cars sold are already electric. We have a ways to go. Battery cost parity should help increase availability. Bloomberg New Energy Finance estimates that over the next few years, it will cost the same to manufacture an EV as to make an equivalent gasoline vehicle. That's part of why we're starting to see so many automakers announce goals of going electric sometime in the 2030s. Meanwhile, policy is incredibly important. Without it, most of these announcements just won't come true. For decades, EV deployment has been driven by a combination of carrots and sticks, incentives and mandates around the world. California's zero-emission vehicle program, federal CAFE standards, CO2 standards in Europe, and government mandate in China. This needs to continue at least until natural market forces have an opportunity to take hold. I've been really grateful over the years to see so many EV users show up and weigh in at CARD meetings and other wonky agency activities to help pass these policies and encourage the agencies involved. Because while automakers are preparing to go electric, they're also collectively still a little bit ambivalent. Some are more excited than others, but EVs remain the only example in the history of the automotive industry in which the automakers have expected demand to precede supply. What this sounds like is every quote you've ever heard from an auto executive along the lines of, when we see demand for electric cars, we'll start to build them. Whether hybrids or SUVs or hydrogen, usually the model is automakers decide to sell something and then create their own market. And yet, public awareness is stunningly low, even after all these years. One of the most surprising things we heard while running around with the first film was, I didn't know electric cars were possible. And people simply can't buy what they don't know is possible. How many of us would have looked at a Walkman decades ago and instead demanded a device smaller than a deck of cards that not only would hold our entire music library, but handle our business communications, let grandmothers see their grandchildren without leaving the house, and order everything from a pizza to a car without speaking to another human? Automakers are essentially expecting consumers across the country to look at a Walkman and ask for a smartphone. We have a lot of possible to teach, which is why this community matters so much. EV drivers and enthusiasts have always stepped up, led by example, and encouraged others. One of the most influential things toward going electric is knowing somebody who already has, getting to see, touch, ride in a casual setting. This is also why we encourage ride and drive events when it's safe to do so, and fingers crossed we'll get back to them sometime relatively soon. What matters more than facts and figures are stories, human interest, and real user experiences. It's why our films found an audience beyond our parents. And why Acterra's EV driving ambassadors are impactful. We sometimes get in our own way by pragmatically talking about why people should go electric rather than why they'll love them. As our executive producer puts it, sell less spinach or ice cream. Because what folks inevitably discover is that going electric is quite simply better. It's joyful. It is zippy. Being cheaper to run leaves more of the family budget for vacations and fun stuff and keeps more money in the local economy. It means never having to rush out of the house 10 minutes early because you didn't feel like stopping at a cold gas station the night before. A smoother, quieter, and calmer commute. Extra time with your children at night because of HOV lane benefits. And yes, better for the planet and our children's lungs, but we should lead with the joy. Including the joy of not driving, the need to support all transit, but certainly to electrify as much of it as possible. The best way to get people to use less fossil fuels is to give them more options to use none. Reliable, affordable public transportation accessible to all is a key place to start. Same with smaller mobility. Whether shared or private, bikes or scooters, other small vehicles offer convenient, inexpensive mobility, especially when paired with safe, appropriate lanes and infrastructure to use them. Ultimately, we must also focus on urban planning that alleviates the need to use any vehicles as much as we do today, that centers people over cars no matter what propels them. Electric vehicles help, but they don't solve everything, and we must be honest about that with ourselves and everyone else. So there is lots to do, but even more opportunity. It's a big pool and the water's fine. Come on in. We have lots of possible to share. Thanks again for letting me share a bit of your evening and for your support of Acterra and our collective promise to our planet. Good night.